The Orinoco River in Colombia is surrounded by vast grasslands, home to many fierce predators. In this episode, Ed will take on a 10-day survival challenge in this wild terrain. Let's see how he handles this adventure. On the first day Ed arrived, a severe forest fire had just occurred. This drastically altered the behavior of many animals, making the environment even more unpredictable. He received support from the driver to quickly move to the starting point of his challenge. After bidding farewell to the driver, he began checking his supplies, still the same 3 essentials: a camera, a satellite phone, and a first aid kit. In addition, Ed also used a high-end drone. He busily determined his direction and ultimately chose the mountain ahead as the first destination of his journey. Bringing his gear and heading toward the mountain ahead, he had to stop after just a few steps. A snake had blocked Ed's path. He identified it as a rattlesnake, a highly venomous species. Just one bite could take down its prey. With only an hour left until sunset, Ed climbed a 10-meter-high peak to find a suitable campsite. Using his drone to survey the terrain, he was captivated by the breathtaking scenery and couldn't help but exclaim, "This place is stunning." He discovered that 1.5 kilometers to the left was a forest, while 10 kilometers to the right was a river. One side offered food, the other water. Feeling conflicted, he wasn't sure which location would be best for survival. Since climbing the mountain had drained too much of his energy, he decided to rest there for the night and leave the rest for tomorrow. Feeling hungry, he was lucky to find 2 lush cacti growing nearby. Using a rock, he smashed it open, revealing the white flesh inside, which looked delicious. Taking a bite, he found it fresh and juicy, with a taste slightly resembling cucumber. Most importantly, its abundant water content could be easily absorbed by the body. At this moment, the raging fire could be clearly seen in the distance. Ed assessed the situation and determined that the fire was unlikely to spread to his location. With that in mind, he decided to spend the night there. Tomorrow, he would embark on his journey to conquer the forest. The next morning, Ed was awakened by a light drizzle. Fortunately, the distant wildfire had also been extinguished thanks to the rain. Yesterday, this land was as dry as a desert, but today, it feels as cool and refreshing as spring. Nature truly is miraculous. Now, Ed is ready to face the challenges of the forest ahead. Since he hasn't eaten anything all morning, Ed eats some wild fruits to curb his hunger before continuing his journey into the forest. The jungle is truly full of surprises. After just a few steps, Ed spots some weathered animal droppings on the ground. Picking it up and taking a whiff, he immediately recognizes the scent. It belongs to a mountain lion. This apex predator fears no other creature, so he knows he must proceed with extreme caution. Ed began moving faster to reach the forest ahead. However, his new challenge was the rising temperature. Looking around, without realizing it, Ed had walked close to the fire. At this moment, he was only 200 meters away from the blaze. 2 hours later, Ed finally made it through the dangerous area and reached a small stream. He checked under the water and discovered a large number of small fish. Due to the scorching weather, Ed's body was losing water rapidly. He decided to take a big gulp of water to rehydrate and quench his thirst. After that, he let himself float along the river, though he wasn't sure if a river python might launch a surprise attack. Fortunately, after more than 10 minutes, Ed made it safely to shore. Wild apples were growing everywhere. He picked one up, took a bite, and the sweet and sour taste was simply indescribable. He didn't forget to take a few apples with him to replenish his energy along the way. Ed started paying attention to the fish in the river, but to catch them, he needed to weave a traditional fish trap. After spending a long time in the jungle, Ed got bitten by insects, making him unbearably itchy. He could only use a rattan branch to scratch himself. Just looking at his face, you could tell how satisfying it was. The fish trap was completed just in time before nightfall. Next, Ed needed to build a shelter, but deciding on the right location became a new challenge. Well, he had no choice but to spend another night sleeping under the open sky. The next morning, Ed spent the entire morning weaving a fish trap. As soon as he placed it in the water, countless fish swam in, looking for food. Now, all he had to do was relax, enjoy the beauty of nature, and wait. 30 minutes later, he went to check the fish trap, but to Ed's surprise, there wasn't a single fish inside. It was likely because the entry and exit holes were too large. Without hesitation, he adjusted the trap and gave it another try. 1 hour later, when Ed pulled up the fish trap to check, it was still empty. This time, he thought the bait might not be good enough. However, with the dry weather in this area, digging for bait would probably be a waste of effort. After weighing all the options, Ed was certain that this place was not suitable for survival. He suddenly remembered that about 8 kilometers away, there was a stunningly beautiful land with abundant natural resources. But the daytime temperature is too high, so it's best not to rush. Therefore, he waited until it was almost evening, as that would be the best time to set off. After walking for a while, night had fallen, making it even harder to determine the right direction. He could only rely on the faint light from the camera to navigate. After some time, Ed became completely exhausted and had no choice but to lie down on the ground and fall asleep. Finally, he reached the forest after 4 days of struggling with nature. The trees here were lush and green. There must be a river nearby. And sure enough, after walking a bit further, Ed suddenly heard the familiar sound of flowing water. He couldn't contain his excitement and let out a delighted laugh. He made it. As expected, there was a small stream here. But the current was strong, and inside, there were so many fish that they were impossible to count. This was far better than Ed's previous pond. Though there were plenty of fish, he had no way to lure them into his trap. After setting up the fish trap, Ed began exploring the surrounding environment. He quickly spotted a large termite nest by the roadside, perfect for use as fishing bait. Apologizing to the termites in advance, he delivered a single kick and destroyed the nest. Ed placed the termite nest into the fish trap and waited for the fish to come and feed. It was time for Ed to find a campsite. Along the way, he picked up an unfamiliar fruit. According to him, this wasn't something to eat carelessly. Inside was a juicy pulp, but if he ate it, there was a chance he'd lose all his hair permanently. However, since Ed was already completely bald, he decided not to take the risk anyway. Ed then went to check his trap. As a result, perhaps thanks to the new bait, he had caught 4 small fish at once. Without hesitation, he enjoyed the fresh sashimi-style fish to replenish his energy. Seeing that the sky was getting darker, Ed knew his top priority was starting a campfire. So he took off his belt and used it as a makeshift hand drill, preparing to create fire by drilling into the wood. It could be said that Ed had repeated this process no less than 1,000 times in his survival journeys. He quickly produced a small spark and used clay to shield the fire from ground moisture, preventing it from being extinguished. After getting the fire going, Ed returned to the river to check his fish trap. Unsurprisingly, he had caught a few more small fish. With the campfire ready, he could now make his special spicy grilled fish. He skewered the fish in a row and roasted them until they were perfectly cooked. Taking a quick bite, he savored the crispy texture. The flavor was simply indescribable. The 5th day of the survival journey had arrived, and the sky was truly beautiful, signaling a bright and promising adventure ahead. Ed took out the unidentified fruit he had picked up the day before. Using a rock, he cracked it open and extracted the pulp inside. This was the culprit behind hair loss and could be highly toxic if consumed in large quantities. So instead of eating it, Ed decided to turn it into a small bowl. He sterilized the inside by roasting it over charcoal, then washed it thoroughly. Now, it was ready to be used as a rice bowl. While walking, Ed suddenly spotted an unfamiliar fruit lying on the ground. Looking up, he was surprised to see many fresh ones still hanging on the tree. Plucking one, he eagerly took a big bite, chewing it with excitement. The taste was a perfect balance of sweet and sour. If any of you know what this fruit is, let me know in the comments. But that wasn't enough. Ed brought the fruit back to camp and roasted it to see if the flavor would change. Soon, another new dish would be ready to enjoy. Just eating plants wasn't Ed's style. So, he headed to a nearby patch of land and started digging. Soon enough, he unearthed a long, wriggling earthworm, an excellent source of protein, easy to find in the wild. Without hesitation, he ate it straight away, just like slurping a noodle. The texture was soft, but an indescribable fishy taste quickly filled his mouth. This is definitely one dish I wouldn't recommend trying at home. Back at camp, Ed used a rock to crack open the roasted seed from earlier and popped it into his mouth. The texture was crispy, with a rich, nutty flavor, and a hint of creamy sweetness. By now, the food problem was solved. What Ed needed next was to build a small shelter to shield himself from the wind and rain. Ed planned to set up a bed by the stream, but he soon realized that the trees here were unusually sturdy. After much effort, he barely managed to bend a small branch. Realizing that this was a waste of time, he opted for the simplest solution, finding a sharp stone nearby and crafting it into a stone axe. Sure enough, with a proper tool in hand, Ed's tree-cutting speed increased dramatically. Working quickly before nightfall, he managed to set up a cozy single bed just in time. As darkness settled in, he could finally enjoy a well-deserved, restful sleep. In the middle of the night, a loud noise jolted Ed awake. The sound came from about 10 meters away, and if his guess was right, it had to be a large animal. This kept him on high alert, forcing him to stay awake for the rest of the night. After enduring the night, Ed started his morning with a bowl of roasted cashew nuts for breakfast. He even extracted some cashew juice for a refreshing drink. Once full, he returned to camp and began setting up cameras around the area. He wanted to find out who the mysterious visitor from last night was. Taking out his drone, he started scanning the surroundings for clues. Ed discovered a swamp downstream, and based on his experience, he suspected it was rich in resources. He decided to head there the next day. On his way back to camp, he picked some wild fruits to eat. The taste was exactly like figs. By the 7th day, Ed woke up early and hurried to check the footage from his cameras to see what had happened during the night. The camera captured footage of a mountain lion wandering nearby. If Ed had to guess, it was likely forced to migrate due to a wildfire encroaching on its territory. This was one of the protected species under local law. So, Ed decided to head into the swamp to hunt. Following the path recorded by his cameras, Ed quickly reached the area. However, as soon as he arrived at the riverbank, he spotted a snake-necked turtle on the ground. In another place, it might have been a perfect ingredient for turtle soup, but here, it was a rare and protected species. If he attempted to eat it, Ed would have to face legal consequences. Moving forward, Ed quickly noticed some movement nearby. Zooming in for a closer look, he realized it was a crocodile. These reptiles were quite common in the area, and their meat could be grilled into a delicious meal. With a target in sight, Ed immediately sprang into action. His plan was to create a trap, one that would instantly hoist the animal into the air the moment it stepped into it. To increase his chances of success, Ed strategically placed branches along the crocodile's path, creating obstacles that would force it to move forward, right into his trap, just as planned. Testing the trap with his own hands, Ed was impressed by its effectiveness. Feeling satisfied with his creation, he was confident that it would work as planned. Back at camp, Ed planned his next day's activities before settling into bed. It had been a rather successful day, and now it was time to rest for the challenges ahead. Ed quickly checked the trap and couldn't believe his eyes. A crocodile was actually hanging in midair. Without hesitation, he rushed forward, pressing down on the animal's mouth to prevent it from biting. Then, he picked up a heavy rock and delivered the decisive blow. After everything was done, Ed let out a sigh of relief. His fingers trembled with excitement. Despite spending years in the world of survival, this was the first time he had ever caught a crocodile. Ed used his stone axe to skillfully skin the crocodile, revealing its fresh, white, and fragrant meat. The best part? The tail. This single, tender, and perfectly white piece of meat was enough to make anyone's mouth water. After 15 minutes of grilling, the delicious dish was finally ready. Tasting a piece of the golden grilled crocodile meat, Ed couldn't hide his satisfied smile. Time quickly passed, and day 10 arrived, the day Ed would return home. Waking up early, he headed to the river for a refreshing cold bath. Once he was clean, he packed up his belongings, made his way to the designated meeting point, and climbed onto a small raft. With that, his perfect survival challenge came to an end.